I think it's important to understand that when we're looking at what I do especially is that part of the feminist criminology approach is that I actually like to sit one-on-one with women or young women and hear their life stories to understand behavior, substance use disorder, the mental health challenges, what happened to you prior to committing the crime.
Life Reimagined with Stacey Ray.
Before we learn about feminist criminology, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and follow us so you never miss an episode of Life Reimagined. Here's what no one wants to admit. Women kill, women abuse, they lead crime rings, and yes, some women even become serial killers. But you wouldn't know that by looking at the headlines or the criminal justice system. Because when it comes to women in crime, society loves a good fairy tale or a juicy villainess, but not the truth. The truth is messier, and it's darker, and a hell of a lot more uncomfortable. That's why today, we're going deep with one of the most fearless voices in criminology, Dr. Kathryn Whiteley. She's one of the few experts who studies the intersection of women in crime, not as a side note, but as her life's work. And she's here to dismantle the myths, challenge the stereotypes, and talk about these women. This isn't about true crime entertainment. This is about justice, power, and the systems that still don't know what to do with dangerous women or the ones just trying to survive. Hi.
Hi, Stacey. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm wonderful.
So I think my first question to you is, you have dedicated your career to studying women and the criminal justice system and the crimes they commit and things like that. Why do you think that women have not really been studied?
Great question, Stacey. And it goes back to, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Around Western society, the criminal justice system has always been patriarchal. Okay, led by men, and of course, a majority of men specifically in this realm that commit violent crimes, often written about, as you understand.
Yes.
So I would say the 60s and 70s when feminism and feminist criminologist, as I am, moved forward and really, I suppose you could say, acknowledged that we do have a representation of women that do commit these violent crimes. And why aren't we acknowledging them? I grin when you say all those years ago when we went to university, but I went to university in Australia, Brisbane in Australia. I was asked then to write a PhD, here we go. And I'm like, I'm taking this on. But at that time when I did my research, and of course you've got to come up with a great research question, etc.
Right.
I thought, well, if I want to go down the path of women and criminality, what about the cohort of women that commit violent crimes? Now, Stacey, going back all those years ago, and I have to say it was a few years ago, a few decades ago, in Australia and Queensland, the state I was from, and I love it to death, but I was refused originally to participate in my research there because it was a small cohort of women that had killed.
Oh.
Can you believe that?
Oh, how interesting.
Yes. And so being the tenacious Kathryn that I am, and when you
Yes.
say no, I think that challenges me all the more, life in general. So I literally had to travel 2 states below to do my PhD, to interview women in Victoria. That's like 2 states below Queensland,
Right.
Melbourne, Victoria. And I went there for over a summer period, etc., for several weeks and interviewed women there. So I think it goes back to your original question is why, and it's almost comes back to financial. What are we going to gain from that? Are they worthy of understanding? But as the decades have progressed, of course, we have people like yourself and other people around that are so fascinated and
Right.
specifically about women. So we've come from this
Yes.
patriarchal society, and now we're putting our hand up and saying, hey, women are violent. We can, or even though we may not act it out, I guarantee many of us think about it. And why aren't we acknowledging them?
What really is the difference between mental health and behaviors? And would you classify sociopathy and psychopathy as more as behavioral or actual mental illness? Where does that fall for you?
Gosh, that's a wonderful question. And I'll begin with when we talk about the behavior. A lot of the women that I work with that have killed, and I also work with females that sexually offend, substance use disorder is very, very key. When the actual crime is committed under the influence of some particular substance. Now, that
Right.
is a risk factor towards their behavior. But so I think that's a little piece we take from that. Mental illness, and that's a broad term as we both
Yeah.
understand and our listeners understand. But there are pieces of a woman's life that are not acknowledged. And then years later, you find or you hear or you learn about that she has committed a violent crime. Now, due to her earlier years, particularly in her teens or early childhood, late teens, if that particular mental health, shall we say, challenge had been acknowledged, possibly that particular crime years later may not have occurred. So it's a whole area of talking about the behavior, the mind, the impact of what they're thinking. Overall, I think we just need to step back. We can't place women all in that one bubble to say, well, it's a mental illness. So therefore, through a sentencing process, we're going to pathologize and excuse the woman. So,
Ah,
there's so much to talk about here, Stacey, but I think it's important to understand that when we're looking at what I do, especially, is that part of the feminist criminology approach is that I actually like to sit one on one with women or young women, as young as
right.
14 or 15 is the youngest I've sat across from, and hear their life stories to understand behavior, substance use disorder, the mental health challenges, the psychological aspect of why and what happened to you prior to committing the crime.
And if you don't mind me interrupting you, I just want to say to our audience that's listening, you do this not to find ways to excuse their crimes. You
Correct.
do this as a way to understand.
That is correct. Sometimes I forget to say I don't condone violence.
Right,
Absolutely.
right.
But I think, and again, I will share that when I started my PhD, like everyone, you're pretty cool and,
Yeah,
stage pretty green, behind the ears
yeah,
as well. I certainly was. But I went in with the thoughts that my PhD is going to be based on the crime, the criminality, and why and what did you do this, that motivation, that,
right.
as we say, that interest that's out there now. And it was one of the women, several, but one in particular, she said, Dr. Whiteley, in order to understand us, why we committed the crime, our motivation, you need to get to know us first. So, Stacey, that changed the whole, I suppose, my research question in the end, because I went in there to focus literally on what everyone wants to know. But it took me back. They were wonderful. They put me in my place, and I totally am thrilled they did, because it led me on this path, this research slash calling. I'd even say my interest, that
Yes,
now I delve into really let's understand the woman from a very young age all the way to where she is today, sitting opposite me in the prison system. And then I also ask them questions about their experience. So that's another piece of that. So I think that's really important, where I differentiate from a lot of researchers. And I have to say, yeah, or what I do is unique, because I don't focus on the actual crime. I focus on the woman. But I want her words, Stacey. I want her to tell the story, not from me.
and I think that absolutely, from my observation, listening to some of the work that you've done, reading some of the things that you've written, is that I do get a better understanding of the individual. True crime podcasts and documentaries and things like that. We are still, no matter how much these podcasters want to tell you, oh, let's get to know the person, let's get to know the victim, let's go, whatever it is. In reality, it is still sensationalized.
Oh, absolutely.
Sensationalism does not bring you truth. It's partial truths, I think.
Stacey, I'm glad you bring this up because part of the questioning, when I say questioning, there are two things I do. So the podcast, even though it's a rigorous process to actually be
Sure.
inside a prison, and that is very unique. So I'm inside these
Yes, I want to
state
hear about
prisons.
that, like what you have to
Oh,
go through to do that. Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing, but when I say it's amazing, it is rigorous, but I love it. I love the challenge. So
Yeah.
the podcast, the conversation, as we've just mentioned, that it's not me with a whole heap of questions in front, and we're going to answer every question. And I
Right.
don't have that approach, Stacey. I don't have that approach, and I've learned over the years. I think it's maturity, wisdom, but also appreciation of the women because they are the best educators. So the
Yeah.
podcast, it's a conversation like what we're having today. But
Right.
I do dig and delve because we know, as I said, at the end of the day, the listeners do want to hear more about, well, what was happening to that woman prior to the crime committed.
Right.
I also do that with my writing, and I'm writing one book, and then I'll have a second one. The first one is with females that have committed murder and their stories, and the other one will be the females that have committed sexual offences, so their stories.
Which we rarely hear about.
Absolutely. So when there's an opportunity to share the women sharing their stories, it's so important because, again, I have people that will say, Stacey, well, how do you know when you're talking to a woman or interviewing or on the podcast, she's sharing the truth? And I'll just say, well, at that moment, this is her truth. Whatever it may be, outside of here, she's telling me or discussing with me what she wants me to hear and what she wants listeners, to hear as well.
That's actually a great perspective because it's interesting that we think that anyone who's committed a crime, I was listening to one last night, actually. She was 14 when she went into the system. I think it
Jamie.
was your April 2025 podcast. She was saying that who she is now doesn't mean that she wasn't capable of doing the horrific things that she did then.
Yes. Yes.
And good people can commit horrific acts. And so I thought that was a very interesting perspective from such a young woman to realize that we are all capable of both the darkness and the light.
Absolutely. Do you know, and that is Jamie is her name, and there is another
Yes.
young lady in the podcast. Her name is Jessica, and she was 16, and she killed a young lady, and there was a group of them. And when you hear what they have to share, you have young ladies or women, older women that are in the system. Some have come from affluent families, well educated. Others
Right.
are the extreme, the poverty, the abuse, etc. And again, it is dark. It's heartbreaking when you hear a collaboration or you hear their stories. And
Right.
each woman, and I say this, Stacey, even though we might say, well, all women that kill are the same, they're not. Each woman is unique. Her life, her pathway to that criminality or that crime, and
Right.
that's what I try to do. And again, I say it's rather unique because A, I access the prison system. B, I spend months going back and forth, 2 to 3 interviews at a time I will have with a woman when I'm writing for the book or other research or
Right.
journal articles. With the podcast, it's usually an hour and a half, an hour to an hour and a half, the one-off that we'll have with the women in the state prison. So, someone said to me recently too, the sentencing, the impact of sentencing, and what is it like for the women? And I said, again, you can't share what one woman experiences is the same. As
Right.
you heard Jamie, 14, she committed the crime, 15, she's literally in a state prison. Jessica, 16, she's in a state prison. I have one woman that went in her early 20s in the podcast, and she's been there nearly 52 years, 53 years. And Stacey, I want to acknowledge the work that I do because I came originally from Australia. So I've interviewed women in the Australian prison system
Right.
and also here in the United States and also in Ireland. So there's some
Ah.
extreme changes. So what I do is I've started with, acknowledging westernized countries, right? So I've come from
Yes.
Australia to the United States and also Ireland. and understanding the sentencing. And this is something, as a feminist criminologist, we've got to consider the sentencing, or the length, and what does a sentence represent for a woman once she's there. Understanding how is that woman going to cope, or what is she going through. The women in Ireland, the women that I interviewed there, and they're all in for a violent crime.
Yeah.
When we've talked about, I visited there back and forth, and I said to them, explain what was your life, like before coming here? But then what do you think about the prison, the sentencing, and is there a future? What's your future hold? And Stacey, after them talking to me, and we've had some great conversations,
Yeah.
and what they said is, after understanding and hearing it from me, that women in the United States serve long to life and life without parole sentences, they said, we've got nothing to complain about. Their average, their sentence, and what they'd refer to as a life sentence, was 16, 18 years.
Oh, my.
Yes, and they're sharing with me. So this is something I write about. They're sharing with me, well, what have we got to complain about? Because we know we're going home. Whereas often many women in the United States, the women that
Never
I
do.
work with, Stacey, they're going to die, or at least 50% of the women I'm currently working with over the years, they are going to stay in the prison system and possibly die there.
Yeah, that was really interesting when I was listening to Jamie's story, that you were even focused on what was it like when you were checking in to the facility?
Yes.
What was that experience like?
Yes.
Addressing, are they petrified, or, is it like a military camp where they're like, hey, soldiers? So that was fascinating to me.
Thank you, Stacey. Again, this I want to share with people is that what I do, there's so many aspects we talk about. When people say, "Oh, you ask them to talk about their lives," because my
Right.
goal is always to provide them with a platform for their voice.
Yeah.
That's my goal till the day I die.
Yes.
But it's interesting when they start to talk a little bit about the county jail, what happened there, and then getting ready to come to the state. Many people don't realize that because our sentencing system, like in Australia or New Zealand or in Ireland, is that, what could we say, is that the jail system, like when we talk about a jail here, often we refer it to as a county jail, and a prison, a state prison. Where in Australia, they'll have detention, they'll have, shall we say, the terminology when it comes to prisons and jails is different as well. Okay, so I just
Right.
wanted to share that with people too. It's not in Australia and the UK and
Yeah.
they don't have county jails where you sit
Right.
for a couple of years before you either go home or you go upstate. And my
Right.
women usually go to a state prison there.
I
So
see.
just with that
Okay.
sentencing. Yeah, it's always
Right.
important because we seem to think sometimes, no matter what country, even when I was in Australia, I used to
Yeah,
think
that it's all the same.
all
Yeah.
the same, and it's not
Yeah.
because our criminal justice system is different. Thank you.
And the
Yeah.
conditions are different, are they not?
What you'll have in Australia, because the population is in their mid-20s, like or 28, 27, 28 million. In Ireland, it's a few million. So when you think about the response and the gender responsive programming inside the prison system, what they have and their surroundings, it
Right.
does vary, right? Because as we know, state prisons here can hold anywhere 1,000 to 1,500. Like the two prisons I go to here in Pennsylvania,
Right.
1,200, 14, 1,500. So
Yeah.
in Australia, the prison, or they call it a jail there, but in one of the prisons I went into, I'll say jail prison, whichever, the women that I interviewed in Melbourne, they actually lived in like little homes. What, you know, yeah,
Oh,
they had two-bedroom, three-bedroom little homes. And so two of the women that were released after 23 years, and the crimes were horrific what they did. Again, women here in the States would be serving possibly life or life without parole, right?
right.
And I had a tour of their home, and it was like, wow, look at us. We've got our own rooms, our kitchenette. And again, this is that therapeutic community. They build that to make the women feel as normal, whatever that means, but as humane, as feminine, whatever it may mean. But they had their own little houses, and they would order in their food. They had the TV. They did their art. And one woman had grandchildren that would visit them. So they're the two grandmothers because they end up being in a relationship. Then you come to, shall we say, the United States. Very minimal there. It's often, all in together in the different cells, 4
Right.
to 8 women. But you can't, and people say, well, we should copy this from the other countries. But remember, the capacity of how many people we have incarcerated is so different.
I think also something to think about, maybe, which I'm sure you have, is that in places like Australia or the UK or Ireland, as you say, they are not putting people in prison for life.
That's
They
correct.
are actually looking to genuinely rehabilitate them so that they can go back out into society.
Well, that's the thing too, Stacey. As you said, it's not. We have great programming in different prisons I've entered here in the United States.
Right.
Absolutely, the women will tell me too. The rehabilitation word sticks with me a little bit because I don't really know what it means because it's unique for each
Right.
woman. But the women
Right.
here in the States, especially, will say the women have got to want to do. They have got to want to change too in order, to make a difference. So I want to just place that in the bigger picture. And
Right.
Stacey, the other thing I'd love to mention is an abandonment, and I talk about this elsewhere. The longer the women, because we do have an aging population, and that makes it very different to other countries too, with the women.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the abandonment, when you hear women, no matter what crime or violent crime they've committed, they talk about the abandonment of loved ones or friends, family on the outside. And it makes common sense, but the longer a woman is inside a prison system, the less person, whoever it may be, visits or acknowledges or writes or, as I said,
Right.
emails, whatever it may be. That's huge for many women the longer they're there, particularly the lifers and the life without parolers. I talk to them, or they talk to me, I should say, it's their story, about the impact of that, the loneliness. I talk to women about death and dying. Again, women that are facing, life without parole. So in my
Right.
conversations and research, we talk about that. Motherhood's another thing I talk about, and as you'll know in the podcast, but also in my interviews as well. And each
Yeah.
woman has this story to tell. And there are women that have killed their children, Stacey, that will say, I was a great mother. I am a good mother. I was a good, you know what I mean? So I can't say it enough how and what needs to be heard from these women. They're the educators, Stacey. And I think that's what makes my work unique is the focus on the non-sensationalism, but it's
Right.
really relevant. Even in the psychological realm, psychology, if you're wanting to know about the motivation or what is it and why did this woman commit this crime to a loved one, a children, a sibling, whichever? Why? Well, you best know the woman first. Get to talk to her.
Yeah, and I actually, Catherine, I have to say, I love that part of what you're doing because I agree. If all I hear is a sensational story, boom, boom, what's in the news, that really tells me very little about how we got here.
Absolutely.
And and I think that we can't help anyone if we don't know how we got here.
What I do is all educational. It's a platform for education and an awareness. Now, the women in Australia, all those years ago when I started with my PhD, and I'd been back a couple of times there,
Yeah.
they've all been released. 2 women maxed out, and they would say max out, what they call a life sentence. These are their words, 23 years. So
Wow.
again, 23 years can represent someone serving 3rd degree, 2nd degree here plus. You know what I mean?
Yes. My God, they put people in prison here for drugs with that
Well,
long of a sentence. So,
well, so I think this is what I think again when I talk about the uniqueness, I don't focus on the women's criminality. They do share those, Stacey. They do share with me if they wish to go down that path when I'm talking to them, if it's via a podcast or if it's via going through the academic realm. But I try not to focus on that, even though that is the sensationalism. But we really
right.
need to understand, and I think that's part of the wonderful opportunities I have is that when a woman knows, and she's incarcerated for many years for a violent crime, when she learns that, Dr. Whiteley's coming in, or she hears about this woman, and she's not going to focus on my crime, she's
Right.
going to focus on me. And I think not think, I know, I believe that's part of the reason that I've been able to go back. And I love what I do, Stacey. I love working with the women.
Well, Kathryn, that is obviously your passion is just, yeah. So I think with what you're referring to, that you've been able to go back because by not focusing on the actual crime and focusing on them, you are building trust that
Thank
you
you.
are actually a more safe space where they actually can be themselves to the degree that they feel comfortable. I notice when you do your interviews, and I know it's not scripted, and we're not scripted either. I have
No.
nothing here. I'm just shooting from the hip. But
Well,
I notice that you ask your questions, but you always say, if you're comfortable discussing that. Let me switch gears for a minute. Do you get accused of people, either general people at large or even in academia, that by focusing on the women and not necessarily the crime they committed, that you are being disrespectful to the victims of their crime?
oh, do you know, Stacey, I have had some discussions or people approach me, and I'll talk a little bit about that, the sensationalism when it comes to, the re-traumatizing. I call it re-traumatizing the victims' family and friends. I
Right.
have had some pushback, but I think after all these years, I think it's how you respond, Stacey, over the years.
Yeah,
That I take it as an open discussion, and they
sure.
have their right to think that way. But I always share that I don't condone violence, and I do skirt around the edge. So there are women that will talk about the victim, or they'll talk about victim's family. I
Right.
have said, whoops, no, we won't go down that path. And I've done that to some
Right.
of the women. But,
Right.
so I am respectful of the bigger picture here. And I try to keep the women on path with our discussion, that we
Right.
don't focus on that, but we need to understand more in order to understand why their crimes were committed.
Well, and I think that because your research and the work that you do, which I think is so commendable, is focused on us actually learning about criminality in women. There are plenty of other researchers who work with victims and the impact on the victims. So I don't think that anyone can be everything to everyone,
Correct.
and so as we know in academia, your research is usually very, very focused. And,
Yes.
I was just curious about that. Can you explain something to me, Kathryn, that I have such a problem? Up, I don't know. I can't keep it straight. What is the difference between sociopathy and psychopathy? Like, what would make someone a sociopath versus labeling them as a psychopath?
The differences we have is that someone is, shall we say, someone has something to gain. In other words, what could I say? That someone, it's premeditated, and the outcome. Well, I don't really care how that person suffers, or the outcome is all about me. And then on the other hand, you have someone that is nurturing, or to the person or to the exteriors, that's nurturing, loving, want to be your friend. And so you've got your differences there of that personality type, as you say. Someone that, they know what they're doing. It's all about them and will manipulate. Where the other is that, oh, woe is me. And sometimes it goes down almost that victim path. Oh, look at me. I need the attention. I want to be your friend. And so people will embrace. And I don't find this really a lot with women, the premeditation. I find it more, it's a response. It's like, again,
Oh,
something that often isn't yeah. So there's your difference. I want to touch on, as you say, the broad picture here to get into the facts. There are women that I work with that kill children. And a couple, I will say, definitely, we talk about the attention seeking. Their daughters were made sick so that they could have the attention. Okay, we've
Munchausen's
heard
by
about this
proxy.
Munchausen, yes.
Yeah.
My proxy, absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a couple of women that have done, I'd say more than a couple of women, but have
Yeah.
gone down that path. So there you have the manipulator, the victim. Where on the other hand, I have women that, wow, I wanted his money. I wanted a new life with a new person. Usually it's a male, but I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to, shall we say, premeditate, but I might even bring someone in to do the killing on
Oh,
my
right,
behalf.
right,
So
yeah,
I'm trying not to go too much down the psychological differentiation here
right,
because, again, I have women that do across the board and trying to narrow down,
right. So they
which
can really
woman, yeah,
overlap. You can have
yes,
components of
yes.
both. Yeah,
Absolute,
yeah,
absolutely. More the sociopathic, I think, for the females. But again, I'm always wary when I put it out there because sometimes a
right,
woman, when I write their story, will say something and someone's reading it saying, well, that doesn't sound like a sociopath, a psychopath. You know what I mean?
right.
So I'm very wary, but the women will share what they think they are anyway. So
Oh, interesting.
it is. And they don't, Stacey, and I get so excited talking about this, but
Yeah,
the women, they can be so honest. I go into a prison system and they have to feel comfortable with me. And for
right,
many of them, I've not met before. So they're a vulnerable population, particularly this, 10 to 13% of women
right.
that kill overall.
10 to 13% of all killers are women.
That's correct. Absolutely.
Okay,
My research has always said in westernized countries, it's around about the 10%, but it can be up as far as 13% here in the
right,
United States. But
right,
in that percentage, the women that I have worked with, over 100 or so women, a larger percentage have killed their children as opposed to their intimate partner or IPH,
really?
intimate partner homicide. But that's me, though, Stacey, working how it's just fallen into my lap graciously, as opposed to
Your
saying,
qualitative research. Yeah,
that's it. I am a
yeah.
qualitative researcher, but I only do interviews. I don't do surveys.
There's so much more ahead right after this short break.
We travel to see the world and end up capturing ourselves. Braver, freer, more alive. And along the way, we collect more than images. We collect moments, shared glances, quiet courage, stories that stay long after the plane lands.
I've really enjoyed myself on this trip. I have lots and lots of memories, lots of photos to remember them by.
Because we don't just take pictures, we capture friendships and the beauty of every step we take together. Capturing moments that matter with Sisterhood Travels. Say yes to your next adventure.
Picking right up where we left off. Have you ever been fearful of sitting one-to-one like that?
I love this question because I get asked, and Stacey, as you can appreciate, one of my little key beefs is when someone says, "Weren't you scared? Weren't you?" And I'm like, "Goodness gracious me, no." But
Yeah,
I'm not scared. I'm anxious, a little bit nervous when I go into a prison system for the first time.
sure.
But I would say probably twice in my life, once in Australia and once in the United States. And the United States, it was an in-depth interview. It wasn't the podcast. And I had no idea what the correctional officer at the time had said, just pull this little gadget,
Yeah,
Dr. Whiteley, and he's walking out. I'm like, well, everything's going fine. Why would I do that? But then later on, you realize the wonderful woman you met has a lot of mental health problems, and we're
right.
very close and intimate. And it was a bit of a
Yeah,
moment after I realized the situation. But no, the other was in Australia, a young woman, and she was the youngest woman there that I interviewed, and she was in her late teens. And I remember her coming into the small room. Now, remember, this is my very first cohort of women that have
yes.
incarcerated for murder. And she had just a very, like a little paper bag with her, whatever. And I remember her sitting down and she said, Dr. Whiteley, and she leant down and went to grab something out of the bag. And I feel so embarrassed, but I want to share it. And for a minute, I'm like, what's she reaching
Oh
for?
my
And
God.
yeah, but it was so silly, Stacey. And it's so
Yeah,
trivial, to even
yeah,
mention it. No, I
yeah,
have a sense, you can't be comfortable in any prison, jail, whatever, but I feel okay. And
right,
I have a sense of faith. I have a sense that whatever will be, will be. And I embrace these opportunities,
right.
Stacey. So speaking to individual women, young and old, and then hearing their life stories. And something you mentioned about mental health, Trauma, absolutely. High ACE scores. And I also saw that with the women that have sexually offended too. High ACE scores and mental health.
Is there a particular type of trauma, say domestic violence or prior sexual abuse of them, that seems to be an underlying commonality with some of these women offenders?
Yes. Recently, or at the end of last year, I visited a state prison here in Pennsylvania and interviewed 10 female incarcerated for sexual offences. So that's going to be the second book. They've given me permission to share their story. So common was the childhood sexual abuse. And
Wow.
Stacey, it wasn't a one or a couple of times or the molestation. This was rape happening over periods of time. So
Like
that
years. Yeah.
years, the victimization continued. Often, of course, a family member, a father, an uncle, a grandfather, and I'm not trying to, point the finger at males, because females that I've
Sure.
met have sexually abused other females, and some of the women have that I interviewed. But their childhood, we always find it hard to comprehend if we were sexually or we were abused. How can then we be the victim and offender? But it happens.
Right.
And so the rape that continued, the sexual abuse, and something else I want to point out, the older generation of women, the women that I'm either on the podcast or interviewing, the female sex offenders and all the women that have killed, when they endured rape as a child, and I'm talking about an older generation now, the women that may be in their 50s, 60s, and 70s that I've interviewed,
Yes.
so tragically is we tried to cry for help. I couldn't speak up because no one would listen.
Right.
And the mother, and I'm not pointing the finger at the mother, but often it was
course.
mum or the grandma, didn't want to know about it, beat me, hurt me, put me into foster care. And Stacey, a lot of it came back to society going back all those years ago. So often the women will say, my mummy or my daddy or whoever it was, whatever happens in the home stays in the home. So when you
Right.
think about 30, 40 years ago, and so these women, and these are women that are perpetrators that have either killed someone or they've sexually abused and sexually abused children. You sit there and you hear, and, and they're telling and they're being, authentic as much as they possibly feel comfortable to be so. And they're sharing with me, this is what happened to them. And we think about it too, Stacey. If you're a little girl going back all those years ago,
Right.
who do you trust? And trust was another piece, and that's a common
Well,
denominator.
absolutely. And I would think, just from my own, reading and things like that, listening to women's stories, or even men in reality, you're re-victimized over and over when no one will listen to you.
Yes.
And then, look at all the kids that are put in foster homes. They're removed from their home where they are being abused, and now they're in
Yes.
a foster home where they're being re-abused by siblings or parents or whomever. And when you talk about the older women, we grew up in a time where women didn't have access to income
Yes.
and jobs and whatever. And so moms, grandmoms, it's almost like they felt they had to ignore it and push it in the background, because who would support their family if they took a stand, and what would happen to them?
Stacey, that is so spot on. What you have just said,
Yeah.
it almost reminded me women sharing their stories, because that's exactly what they had said. And there was just mum who stayed at home
Right.
often, and dad worked. And what was mum going to do?
Right.
And it's humbling when you hear the women talk about years later and acknowledging it, they forgive. And that's incredible. They forgive in order they will share to move on. But gosh, they'll forgive the mum that, turned the blind eye. You mentioned something interesting about foster care, Stacey. One woman, I always like to bring out something that, we think about foster care, the good, the bad, all of the
Right.
lovely All of those things,
Yeah.
absolutely. But it was so interesting to hear one woman who was constantly raped as a little girl, I think from 7 till 12 years old,
Oh
by
my
her
goodness.
stepfather. And again,
Yeah.
this woman's in her 50s now. But she had said that the best time for her and a couple of older brothers was when she was in foster care. She felt safe. So I wanted to point that out because, sometimes it gets a bad rap. And some of these women, and her example, it was so powerful. She said, I had a couple of bigger sisters there. They looked after me. We did this. I got love. I wasn't scared. I felt I could trust someone there.
That
Isn't that
is,
wonderful? I mean, it's
yes.
tragic, but it's wonderful at the same time because there is the goodness there. But that was the best. She noted, Stacey, that was literally the best part of her childhood when she was in foster care.
Wow. That's not only incredible, that is actually heartwarming
Yes,
because
yes,
we don't hear about those stories nearly as much as we do the horrors.
that's it. And we should, Stacey, because it's a bit like there is.
I'm curious, when you were talking about 10 to 13%
Mhm.
of killers are women, how many would you say that at least that maybe you've worked with actually kill their perpetrators as opposed to someone else?
I would say 30%, 35% of the women that I have worked with. Because we do focus, Stacey, a lot on intimate partner violence or intimate partner
Right,
homicide. And
right,
again, those women in other countries may serve a very short sentence. We're here in the United
right,
States. It's
right.
possibly a lot longer, even though it's in self-defense.
What are we not doing right still, in your very educated opinion, for women who are victims of intimate partner violence, that we are still putting them in jail for the
Mm.
rest of their lives for killing their perpetrator?
Good question, Stacey. I think what we do with the laws here, the sentencing, and we're doing better. I think we have to acknowledge more about her past than
Right,
focus on the crime itself. And I know that's what sentencing is. You're convicted
right,
because of what happened then and there at that moment, and that's law across the
right.
board. But
Sure.
I think, and again, we are moving more towards that of having, shall we say, mental health workers, practitioners, acknowledging that knowing the woman and learning about her needs to be somewhat represented in a
Right,
court of law. And
right,
I think we're getting better, but we've got a long way to go.
right.
The wonderful thing, though, I will share is coercive control. Now, I see in the UK, I've read, and the same with Australia, is that is a crime. There is sentencing for that in those countries. Here, it's included, but we've still got a bit of a way to go to acknowledge or include that, I think, in our sentencing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I agree with you, Catherine, because I don't think coercive control is actually respected as part of a self-defense.
You're right. I don't think it is. It's acknowledged from many of us,
Right,
but beyond that, and where they place that in that overview of a woman's life when it comes to sentencing and the crime itself, I think the United
right.
States, there are amazing practitioners out there, specialists that are working in here in the United States, and they have so much information. We need their messaging to be heard even more for the women here in the
Yes,
United States, because
yes,
it took me back a little bit when I heard in England and in Australia. It is deemed solely by itself, shall we say, a crime. Where here it's I think it's a little bit muddled, a bit blurred into the overall sentencing,
yeah,
or. And again, that's a little piece of, and it's fluid too. I mean, how much it
yeah.
impacts. So
Now,
that was key.
yeah. But I do have one question that I haven't asked you yet, and that is how many female serial killers have you come across? And are
Oh,
they more, are the numbers more profound than we think? Or tell us about that.
well, isn't this interesting? Stacey, everyone wants to know about serial killers. Now,
Right.
they are, I believe, less than 3% of serial killers in westernized countries. And I always say westernized countries to be safe.
Right.
What we do know is there is that manipulation, very similar traits when it comes to males, but it's remember the females approach it in the nurturing, the
Right.
nurture, the lover, where it appears with the males, it is manipulated. It's
Yes.
and it's control, right? Where, with the females, it's a little bit more like, well, here's an example. I've only interacted with one woman that was deemed a serial killer. And
Okay.
the course of her killing was over several years of intimate partners. So there's
Okay.
a bit, yeah, years later, so I've met her. I wrote a little bit about her. She's now deceased and she was here in Pennsylvania. But often you'll find with women too, such as if you're looking at the bigger picture here, the serial killer, it could be the mum, the nurse, the caregiver. Think about Lucy Letby in
I was just
England.
thinking Lucy Letby, right?
Yes. And I spoke a little bit about that with Australian media or gave them an overview on my perspective on her. But it's a matter of over time, and it's usually that nurturer, that caregiver, but there is that continual pattern. Whereas with males, it appears to be there's that calculatedness, and it's over a period of time, and they seek out. Where it's the women, it's more we may seek out, but it's right there usually in our control. You know what I mean? It's so interesting, particularly when we think about the nurses or the parent that gives the children the children medication over a
Right.
period of time, or
Right.
Munchausen's by proxy. Think about that over a period of time. But
Right.
it's less than 3%, and I've only met one woman, but I do get asked that. Stacey, I do want to share something on that though. I'm one of these, because I've met so many women in this realm, and again, I don't
Right.
condone what they've done, but I always think, what is the fascination with serial killers? And it makes me
Yeah.
laugh because I'm like, from my perspective, it's like, okay, okay, it's a
Yeah.
serial,
Yeah.
but it is interesting, and I think that's a lot to do with not just there's more than one victim, but also the sensationalism by the media, the writing, the storytelling, don't you think?
Yeah. And I also think it's part of that catch me if you can mentality. Like,
Yes. Yes.
okay, there was one, now there's two, now there's three. We've got a serial killer on our hand. And so it's almost like this mob mentality. Everybody's like, catch them, catch them. And then if and when they ever catch them, now we want to know all the gory details.
That's it.
When,
That's it.
yeah, when in fact, I think it's someone like Eileen Wuornos. I think,
Yeah.
like, to me, and listen, I don't even profess to know a tenth of anything about her, other than the fact that she clearly suffered her whole
Thank you.
life
Thank you. Thank you. I'm
and
going to agree
was
with you. Thank you.
a severe victim of abuse. I don't think her reasons for killing are the same as a Lucy Letby, right? I
Correct.
think
Correct.
completely different. And
Very
I
different.
think and I think that I I don't know, this is just me, amateur. I don't think Eileen Wuornos was doing this so that she could become famous as a serial killer. Okay? I almost liken it to having to release that anger and rage, and that's the only way
Mm,
she could do it.
yeah.
Not excusing her, not, nothing like that, but I'm just trying
Mm,
to understand. And that's, Kathryn, why I have so much respect and adoration for what you do,
thank you.
because you're actually trying to understand
Mm,
how we
mm,
get there. It's not about the big news stories and, oh my God, the headlines and
mhm.
it,
Stacey, on that note, may I say, is that
yeah,
when you look at all, like even in England, Lucy's case, and you looked at Aileen's case,
right,
there is society, people around that let you down. And we
Right.
know with Lucy's case, and again, I'm not there and I only know what I know. I'm not
Right.
investigating. That's been opened more broadly. You know, there is a system
Right.
there that let a lot of the families down, which I'm just
Sure.
suggesting. You know what I mean? So, and even with Aileen, there were people around her that let her down. So, you
Right.
know what I mean? Or so it's so complex. And you're
Yeah.
right, Stacey. The only way we really get to understand why or who is understanding who they are. And the
Right.
women are the best storytellers. And that's what I love about sitting opposite a woman, is that this is
Yeah.
our moment for them to be as authentic as they feel comfortable. And the same with me. What you see literally is what you get, even with the women. You know,
Right.
so the other little piece to that, Stacey, when we talk about the sensationalism, is that one time last year I presented at a conference, and I had a woman come up to me, and I always acknowledge that we don't want to re-traumatize the victims' families and loved ones and friends
Right.
by talking about it or writing about it. But I also acknowledged that we must not forget the re-traumatizing of the offender or the perpetrators, shall we say, family and friends. And at this conference, an amazing woman come up to me and she said, "Thank you for acknowledging people like me." And I wasn't sure what she was meant at that time. And she said, "Kathryn," she said, "my daughter has been incarcerated for sexually offending." And she said the stigma, the pushback, well, these are my words, from everyone around them, not wanting to know them, etc. So I just want to acknowledge
Oh
that
my,
too.
yeah.
Let's not forget that there are the women that have committed these crimes, not just the victim. Let's look at the bigger picture here too.
There are so many victims, and
Yes, there are.
I think we do tend to forget that. I
Yes, we
think
do.
we focus on, if someone murders someone, we think there's your victim. But we have forgotten there is a whole circle around both that victim, but also around the offender. And I'm
Absolutely.
so glad that you brought that up, because that's true. I have heard about the stigma and the shunning of
Yes.
the
Yes.
offenders' families and friends and children, and that's heartbreaking for the children.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
Stacey, it was very brave of this woman. I'm a complete
Yes.
stranger. And she came up and she was nearly in tears. And she
Yes.
said, "Thank you just for acknowledging us, as a parent,
Right.
for her
Right.
older daughter's behavior. Thank you for acknowledging us." So that's something that you learn about too.
Is there any one that you have interviewed for your podcast, for your books, that really gets you like right here? I mean, I'm sure all of them do in some way, but anyone that is the one?
There are a few, the ones I have to say over
Yeah.
the years, but our new series of women for our podcast comes out early February. So there'll be 8 weeks of 8 new women. Um, there is a young lady that talks about, and I don't want to give too much away, but these are the situations that you go, "Oh my gosh," sharing that by the time she was like 13, 14, she had her first child and then had more children. And then by her mid-20s, etc., she's incarcerated for murder. I mean, okay, when you hear about that, again, when you hear about the women, they talk about their abuse.
Right.
But it is so humbling when they say, "Well, I forgave my father, or I forgave my mother." And I'm sitting back because I'm very blessed. I've not come from any abuse. And I'm sitting back going,
Right.
wow, it takes a strong, special woman to acknowledge in order to also for her to move on. But it's
Right.
easier said than done, Stacey.
Oh
So
my
those
gosh,
are the women.
yeah.
They're the women that I think I walk away and think, wow, I have learned so much about them, but also about myself. These women keep me literally on the straight and narrow, Stacey. They make me who I am today, and I'm so grateful again for
I'm
for this.
curious, what have you learned most about yourself doing this work?
I think understanding not to take life for granted, and that's very blasé, but it's a bit like it can happen to any one of us anytime. the judgment. I think the women have taught me so much about being less judgmental. I
Right.
try not to be, but everyone judges. Let's face it;
Of
it's a norm in
course.
psyche.
Yeah. We are
It is.
human after all. Yeah.
We judge things. Wow, look
Yeah.
at that. But
Yeah.
I believe the judgment. They have taught me to be humble, because when you walk in to a prison or jail, whichever, and you're looking or sitting across at them, what they're wearing, how they look, they're aging. Usually, they age 10 to 15 years more in a prison. All these things you're taking in consideration, and then you think to yourself, and I walk out of here and I go back to a loving husband and home and safety. They have taught me gratitude and how blessed I am. But they've also given me this opportunity. This is for me to share their stories. This is like my life journey, Stacey. It's my life journey with these women. Can I tell you one other thing before we go?
Absolutely.
The lovely thing about the women from Australia to Ireland to the United States and hopefully England soon is that I have, wherever possible over the last couple of decades or so, I have tried to visit. I do write the old-fashioned handwriting to some of the women. They'll write back. I get Christmas cards, handmade
Oh
Christmas
my
cards.
goodness.
I get recipes. I've had pictures, paintings from a woman that was incarcerated in Dublin. She was Polish. She was extradited last year or the year before last back to Poland. I get this in the mail, not knowing that had been extradited. I get in the mail this package. I thought, what is this? It was one of her paintings, and she's a brilliant artist. She'd left and said, please send to Dr. Whiteley before I go back to Poland, the Polish prison system. It
Right.
arrived. So I've got I've got paintings, pictures. I love that. And the best Christmas
Yeah.
cards, the homemade ones you get usually from the women inside. So I try to
Yeah.
keep that connection when we talk about abandonment. I
Yeah.
don't take the information and run, Stacey. I try somehow, somewhere to keep in touch with them the best I can.
That is amazing because I'm not sure. I'd say sometimes we think of being an academic researcher, it's all factual. There's no heart in there. And that's not true. Clearly, Kathryn, with the work that you're doing.
Mm.
I do want to ask you one more question. Do you have a percentage of women who, when they sit with you, aren't really there yet of acknowledging either not so much what they did, but how they got there, that perhaps they're still not clear on what brought them to that place?
Stacey, absolutely. And very, very small percentage. I would say about 10%. I have women
Okay.
that still are in denial, I should say,
Yeah.
20 years later that they committed the crime.
Right.
Someone set me up. Psychologically, yes, I have some women that say, I don't know, I can't recall how it happened. I don't, I can't remember
Right.
being there. And that's not like me. So there would be roughly, and again, this is a vague picture, but about
Sure.
10% that either mixed all into that, either still are fighting to say I'm innocent after all these years. And who
Right.
knows, Stacey? I mean, again, I'm only going on their words, or have not acknowledged that they did do what apparently alleged or what they've been convicted for.
Right.
There is denial there. There is denial, but a very small
Right.
cohort of women.
Right.
And usually it's the women. Well, it is the women here in the United States. That 10% of women that would say that.
Have you ever worked with anyone who actually ends up that they have been wrongfully convicted? That maybe perhaps they were innocent?
At this stage, I haven't, but I have worked with 2 women in the United States that were commuted. So they,
Oh.
so they were released. Both of those women they're incarcerated for life, but they were commuted after, I think it was like 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
So just only very, very scarce again, only
Right.
2 women that were commuted. There are a handful, not even that, less than a handful of women that have been given the opportunity to go, well, less than that, probably a couple of women that I've worked with that have been given the opportunity to go to a hospice. Now, going to a hospice means that you go outside, you go into a hospital facility, but you are going to die within a fixed 3 to 6 month period.
Right.
So I have a couple of women I've worked with them, and hospice was their last. But
Right.
no, I don't know directly any women that have had their conviction overturned in that perspective.
Well, thank you for that. Kathryn, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the podcast. And the truth is, I have so much more that I would love to chat with you about. Maybe you'll consider coming back
If you
for
have me, I
another.
would love that.
Oh, I
Yes.
would love that too. Because I think there's so much that we can pivot into, like reforms in the prison system and all of those types of conversations. But for now, thank you so much for sharing your valuable work and also shedding light on the women themselves, because I think that's the biggest part that we need to learn from. So thank you so, so much.
Stacey, thank you. It is an honor. And I want to share this. The women will love to know that I have given them a voice on your media platform. So thank you from the women.
Thank you. If you liked this show, please be sure to like us, follow us, subscribe to us, give us a review, because it really helps grow our podcast.